Her hand was shaking. The coffee cup rattled against the saucer. Tears ran down her face as she set it on the table. The man sitting there looked up. Cologne, Germany. 2001. A quiet cafe on Friesenplatz. He asked in broken German, "What's wrong?" She tried to smile. Failed. Whispered, "They're evicting us tomorrow. My kids and me. I don't know what to do." He didn't say anything. Just pulled out his phone. One call. 15 minutes later, her phone rang. The landlord. Voice trembling. "I made a mistake. You can stay. Rent stays the same. I'm sorry." She looked back at the table. The man was gone. Left cash for the coffee and a €100 tip. She never knew who he was. His name was Necati Arabaci. But in Cologne, they just called him Nico. And when Nico made a phone call, people listened because he wasn't just any man. He was a king of Cologne's underworld. This is the story of a man who trafficked women, extorted businessmen, and controlled an empire built on violence. But also the story of a man who saved families from eviction, paid hospital bills for strangers, and protected the vulnerable in his city. One phone call could ruin your life, or save it, depending on who you were and what you meant to him. Necati Arabaci was born in Turkey in 1972. At 14 years old, he arrived in Germany with his family. Immigrants. No money, no connections. Just hope. They settled in Cologne, a city that would one day tremble at the mention of his name. But in 1986, he was nobody, a kid who barely spoke German, working odd jobs, trying to survive. By 18, he was working as a bouncer. Nightclubs, bars, the kind of places where trouble walked in every night. And Nico learned fast. Violence wasn't just accepted in that world. It was currency. If you could fight, you could earn. If you could intimidate, you could rise. And Nico, he could do both. By 22, he wasn't just a bouncer anymore. He owned the bouncers, every single one. He joined the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, Cologne chapter. In Germany, the Hells Angels weren't just bikers. They were an organization, a network. And Nico saw opportunity. He started a security company. On paper, it was legitimate. Event security, club security, bodyguards. But in reality, it was a protection racket. You want security for your club? You hire Nico. You don't want trouble? You hire Nico. You want to operate in Cologne's nightlife? You pay Nico. And if you didn't, well, trouble had a way of finding you. Broken windows, fights that shut down your business, inspections that appeared out of nowhere. The message was clear. Work with Nico or don't work at all. If this story already sounds insane, hit subscribe, because it gets way more complicated. By the late 1990s, Necati Arabaci controlled an empire. Starlight, Penthouse, Pacha. These weren't just nightclubs. They were institutions. Pacha, in particular, was legendary. A 12-story mega brothel in Cologne, 120 rooms, hundreds of women, millions of euros flowing through every year. And Nico had his hands in all of it. Police documents later revealed he controlled roughly 60% of Cologne's nightlife. 60%. One man, he expanded beyond Cologne. Dortmund, Essen, Augsburg, the entire Rhine-Ruhr region. Wherever there was nightlife, there was Nico. His network included brothels, strip clubs, escort services, and event security. He employed hundreds. Bouncers, drivers, managers, accountants. It was a corporation. Brutal, efficient, untouchable. But here's where it gets twisted. Because the same man who trafficked women and ran illegal brothels also made sure no child in his neighborhood went homeless. Sounds impossible, right? But it's true. And nobody understood why. Not the police. Not even his own crew. Until years later, when the truth came out. In 2002, German authorities finally had enough. Raids across Cologne, Dortmund, and Augsburg. Dozens arrested. Nico was charged with human trafficking, pimping, extortion, and operating illegal prostitution rings. The evidence was overwhelming. Wiretaps, testimonies, financial records. He was looking at serious time. But even from inside a cell, Nico's empire kept running. Phone calls from prison, coded messages, visits from associates. The club stayed open. The money kept flowing. Police were stunned. How do you stop a man who controls everything even when he's behind bars? Then, during the investigation, something strange appeared in the wiretaps. Conversations that didn't fit. Nico talking about rent payments, hospital bills, evictions. At first, investigators thought it was code, money laundering, maybe, but it wasn't. It was exactly what it sounded like. Nico was helping people, dozens of them, families facing eviction. He'd make a call. Problem solved. Someone couldn't afford surgery. He'd cover it. Anonymously. A single mother struggling with rent. Paid. A small business owner being extorted by someone else. Nico would send his guys to have a conversation. The extortion stopped. Why? Why would a man who destroyed lives also save them? Before I reveal what happened to prosecutor, drop a comment. Is Nico a hero or villain? Because what comes next will make you question everything. The answer came from his past. 1986, Istanbul. Before the family immigrated to Germany, Nico's mother was a seamstress. His father worked construction. Money was tight. The landlord kept raising rent. One day, 14-year-old Necati watched his mother beg, on her knees, pleading with the landlord not to evict them. The man laughed, told her she had 1 week. Nico never forgot that. The humiliation, the helplessness, his mother crying in the kitchen, his father's shame. That week, his family scraped together enough to pay, but the damage was done. A few months later, they left Turkey, for Germany, for a better life. And Nico made a silent vow. He would never let that happen to anyone in his city, ever. So he built an empire on violence and fear. But he also used that empire to protect the vulnerable. Not everyone, just the ones who decided deserved it. Families, kids, people who reminded him of his own mother. It wasn't charity. It was a twisted code of honor, brutal to enemies, loyal to those under his protection. And in Cologne, if you were struggling and someone whispered your situation to the right person, you might get a visit, cash in an envelope, a phone call to your landlord, a problem that suddenly disappeared. You'd never know who helped you, but in the neighborhood, people knew. Nico takes care of his own. In 2004, Necati Arabaci stood trial. The charges were staggering. Human trafficking, procuring, aggravated pimping, extortion. The prosecution had recordings, documents, witnesses. He was convicted and sentenced to 9 years in prison. It seemed like the end. The king of Cologne finally dethroned. But Nico wasn't done. Not even close. Because while he was in prison, something happened that would change everything. Investigators discovered new wiretaps. In these recordings, Nico was heard discussing a hit, a contract, on the prosecutor, the one who put him away. He'd hired an Albanian assassin. The plan was detailed, methodical, and very real. A second trial, attempted murder, solicitation of murder. The evidence was damning. Nico could have faced life in prison. But then something strange happened, a mistranslation. In the wiretaps, the language was unclear, Turkish mixed with German, slang. The defense argued the translation was wrong, that the word used didn't mean kill. It meant pressure. Intimidate, not assassinate. The judges reviewed the tapes. Linguists were called in, and somehow the defense won. The attempted murder charge was reduced. Instead of life, Nico got additional time, but not much. And the prosecutor? Terrified, because even if the translation was wrong, the intent was clear. Nico wanted him gone. The prosecutor quietly left Germany, relocated, changed his life. Because even from prison, Nico's reach was long. In 2007, Necati Arabaci was deported. He'd serve his time. But Germany didn't want him anymore. Turkish citizen. Send him back. He landed in Istanbul, and everyone thought that was it. The legend of Nico, over, but they were wrong. because what he did next shocked even Interpol. Within 3 years, Nico became president of the Hells Angels motorcycle club Nomads Turkey. Not just a member, the president. He rebuilt his network, not in Germany, in Turkey, and across Europe. By 2013, there were rumors, whispers in law enforcement circles. Nico was being considered for a leadership role across all Hells Angels chapters in Europe, a transnational promotion. The king wasn't just back. He was expanding. But Europe wasn't going to let him operate freely. In 2015, Spain issued an international arrest warrant. Charges: extortion, human trafficking, operating illegal brothels across Spanish territories. The warrant was valid across the entire European Union. If Nico stepped foot in any EU country, he'd be arrested immediately. So he didn't. He moved to Dubai, United Arab Emirates, a country with no extradition treaty with Spain, or Germany, or most of Europe. And from Dubai, Nico lives freely, runs businesses, legitimate ones, allegedly, but his past follows him. Interpol has his file. Spain wants him. Germany wants him. But Dubai doesn't care. As long as he doesn't commit crimes on UAE soil, he's untouchable. And back in Cologne, his legacy remains. The clubs he controlled have changed hands. Some shut down. Others still operate. The Hells Angels Cologne chapter still exists. But Nico's name is spoken in whispers. Some people remember the violence, the trafficking, the fear. Others remember something else. The family whose rent got paid. The kid whose hospital bill disappeared. The single mother who didn't get evicted. That waitress? She found out years later. She was working at a different cafe in 2009. A former employee of one of Nico's clubs recognized her, mentioned the story, told her about the boss who used to help people quietly, described the man. She went pale. It was him. The quiet guy who drank coffee and made a phone call. The one who left €100. She'd served the most dangerous man in Cologne, and he'd saved her life. She never tried to find him. What would she even say? Thank you? I'm sorry? She kept working, raised her kids. And every time someone asks how she survived those years, she tells the truth. A stranger made a phone call. She just leaves out who the stranger was. Police estimate that over the years, Nico helped between 30 and 50 families. Maybe more. He never kept records. Never bragged about it. For him, it wasn't about recognition. It was about the code. The promise he made to himself as a 14-year-old kid watching his mother beg. And here's the thing. Those families, they had no idea the money came from an empire built on exploitation. The rent that got paid, funded by brothels. The hospital bill that disappeared, paid with money from extortion. Does that make the help less real? Does it erase the suffering his empire caused? Or does it just make the whole thing more complicated? Necati Arabaci is now in his 50s, still in Dubai, still connected to the Hells Angels network, still wanted in Europe. If he ever returns, he'll be arrested. Spain's warrant doesn't expire. Germany hasn't forgotten. But for now, he's free, living under the desert sun, far from the cold streets of Cologne where he built his empire, far from the cafe where a single mother cried into her apron, and far from the consequences of both his crimes and his kindness. So here's the question nobody can answer. Was Nico a monster with a heart, or a manipulator buying loyalty with selective kindness? Did he help those families because he genuinely cared, or because it was good for business? Because people who owe you don't betray you. People who love you don't talk to police. And in a world built on fear, a little kindness goes a long way. The waitress never saw him again. Her kids grew up, got jobs, moved out. She still works in Cologne, still serves coffee, and sometimes when a customer is kind, leaves a big tip. She wonders, is this just a generous stranger? Or is there more to the story? Because she learned something that day in 2001. You never really know who you're serving. The quiet man at table 7 might be nobody, or he might be the most dangerous man in the city. And sometimes those are the same person. Necati Arabaci remains free. The families he helped will never forget. The victims of his empire will never forgive. And the truth sits somewhere in the middle. Uncomfortable, complicated, human. Here's what I want to know. Do you think Nico was a monster or a complicated man trying to do some good? Drop your theory below. And tell me, if you were that single mom, would you feel grateful or guilty? Because I honestly don't know the answer. And subscribe. Next week, the mobster who ran a billion-dollar operation from a hospital bed. The FBI had no idea until it was too late. You won't believe how he pulled it off. See you then.